everybody. Thanks for joining us. And yes, we do have some guests from Montana and Utah, so I'm happy to see that that link was shared. I'm Valerie Cazella, the current Colorado Dental Hygiene Association president. I'm happy to introduce Matt Schaefer. He is the current Associate Director of Public Policy on the Council on State Governments. And Alyssa and Courtney and I had the pleasure of listening to him speak at ADHA annual session, and he's going to introduce what's going on with this potential legislation that Colorado will likely sign on to. We do have policy to support that. It's just going to make it easier for folks transferring from out of state to come in and to realize we're part of this compact if they didn't already know it was easy to transfer licensure here. So Matt, take it away. And I'll just remind participants, if you have a question, throw it in the Q&A section and we'll answer those at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. Like Val said, my name is Matt Schaefer with the Council of State Governments. I'm in CSG's National Center for Interstate Compacts, and I'm excited to be talking with you all this evening about the Dentist and Dental Hygienist Compact, which is an initiative that we've been working on with the American Dental Association and the American Dental Hygienist Association for about the past year or so. And we have an initial draft of the compact ready to share, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I'm going to start and just talk broadly about what interstate compacts are, talk about their use in other professions and our development process for how this compact was developed, and then we'll get into the specific provisions for the Dentist and Dental Hygienist Compact. So just a little bit to start about CSG before we get into the compact. If you're not familiar with us, we are the nation's only membership association for state government officials that serves all three branches. So we work with the state legislature, we work with the executive branch, and the state court system as well. We were founded in the 1930s at the University of Chicago and moved our headquarters to Lexington, Kentucky, where I am based, in the 1960s. And so we serve our members through a variety of ways, namely hosting convenings, conferences, developing working groups and task force to solve policy issues that cross state lines, helping leaders come together, collaborate, and learn from one another. We also have a magazine that goes out regularly to our membership, and do a lot of policy research, responding to research requests, and providing consulting services for states. One aspect of CSG that I mentioned I'm a part of is our National Center for Interstate Compacts. So CSG has been working on compacts really since we were founded in the 1930s, and we formalized all of that work in 2004 when we founded the National Center for Interstate Compacts. So we are the only technical assistance provider in the country around the creation, revision, and enactment of interstate compacts. So there's really no other group out there that does what CSG does in terms of our work on interstate compacts. And so we've been the primary facilitator of all of the active occupational licensing compacts, and I'll show you a list of those here in a couple slides. But we have a vast history and expertise with working with professions on developing these interstate agreements. Okay, so what is an interstate compact? So our definition, you can see here on this slide, a legal, legislatively enacted contract between two or more states. So there are compacts out there that are just between two states or groups of states, like regional compacts. There's also national compacts. I think the most pertinent example that I can share that probably resonates with folks is that picture you see on the screen there. It's your driver's license. That was actually your ability to drive across state lines without having to stop at the state border and get a new driver's license. That was actually done through the development of an interstate compact. So the states came together and collaboratively solved this issue rather than some sort of federal mandate or some sort of outside entity creating this solution. The states came together and developed this for themselves. So a couple other things to emphasize here. Compacts are legislatively enacted. So that means that your state has to pass a bill in order to join the compact, and that is an act of your state legislature. So we get questions all the time about, how does my state join the compact? How do I be a part of it? And in order for your state to become a member of the compact, it requires legislative action. And the other thing to emphasize here is that this is a legal contract. So this is not just some sort of administrative change or a change at the board level that could be easily altered or adjusted. This is a legal agreement that is binding on all of the member states, and it's really hard to change once you've entered into a contract, as I'm sure you all understand. The same goes for these compacts. These are legal contracts between states, and once you're a part of it, it's hard to change any of the provisions. And so the states really need to understand what they're getting themselves into by signing on to be a part of this legal agreement between multiple states. Okay, so CSG has really seen an explosion in recent years around interest for using interstate compacts to solve problems related to occupational licensing. So historically, compacts have been used for a lot of different things. I talked about the example of your driver's license, managing shared natural resources, any kind of river or gorge or natural thing in the country that crosses state lines. There's always going to be an interstate compact that governs that. And so historically, that's kind of how these compacts have been used. But really, in the past decade or so, states have been turning towards compacts to solve this issue of licensure portability. So you can see just how popular these have been in recent years. 230 pieces of compact legislation just in the last 6 years. Colorado is a part of 8 of the 9 occupational licensing compacts, so you guys are doing really well. Utah, I know we have some folks from Utah. Utah is the only state that's a member of all 9, so kudos to Utah. You've passed all of them, so I think that's a good sign for this compact as well. Your legislature is very favorable, and Colorado's is as well. But couple things to note here on this slide. The primary purpose of these compacts, again, is to facilitate multi-state practice. So there's a lot of myths and misconceptions around what compacts do and don't do, but at a baseline, all we're trying to do is create an alternative process for people who want to be mobile, who want to either work in multiple states or move across states often. We want to create an alternative pathway for those people to not have to be licensed every time they move or every time they want to practice in a new state. So this is not, we are not usurping the current system. This is not a takeover of state licensing in Colorado. This is just the creation of an alternative pathway. So I think that's really important to emphasize, especially for regulators who often, have concerns around seceding some of their control over how the profession is regulated in terms of licensing requirements, scope of practice, things like that. But all of that stays in place. The compact does not touch any of that. And so we also often point to compacts as allowing for this multi-state pathway while simultaneously preserving state authority over professional licensing. And then lastly, compacts help improve, maintain or improve public health and safety. This is largely down to just the amount of information sharing that occurs between interstate compact states. We're really raising the bar in terms of regulation in regards to the amount of information that regulators have access to in making public health and safety decisions. Okay, so I mentioned I was going to share a slide with all of the active compacts, so you can see them here. Nursing was the first out the door. They actually wrote their first compact in 1999 and then revised it in 2016. And then all of these other compacts have followed since 2016. So you can see nursing and medicine lead the way with 39 member states. They're the oldest. Psychology and PT close behind with 34. These other ones over here on the right side of your screen have a little bit lower in terms of their membership, but really the only reason for that is just that they're newer. OT, counseling, and the APRN compact have all only been out to the states for 2 years, and so that's why their membership is a little bit lower than some of these other ones like nursing and medicine. Okay, so here is a list of the compacts that CSG is currently working to develop. So you can see dentistry and dental hygiene here on the screen, as well as a host of other compacts. I'll note here that all of these compacts are being funded through a cooperative agreement that CSG has with the Department of Defense. So DoD is the one funding the dentistry and dental hygiene compact. And that might not seem intuitive at first thought. Why would DoD care about funding interstate compacts? Shouldn't they be funding weapons or things like that? But DoD really cares about this issue because they want to solve the problem of licensure portability for their military spouse population. So I don't know if we have any military spouses in the audience tonight, but military spouses are a highly mobile group of licensees. Military spouses move on average of every 1 to 2 years. And so when you're talking about having to get relicensed every year or every 2 years, that becomes extremely burdensome. And more than likely, you're probably just going to drop out of the workforce altogether rather than having to navigate every state's new licensing process, passing different clinical assessments or written exams, paying fees, going back to school in some instances. And it just becomes so burdensome that oftentimes spouses just give up. And so DoD wants to solve this issue, and they see interstate compacts as the best long-term solution for their military families. And so they partnered with CSG to fund all of these new compacts. We're really excited about a lot of these that are being developed and their potential impact on the profession at large, as well as the military spouse population. So that's another important thing to note here is that DoD is footing the bill for the compact, and they're developing it for military spouses, but they recognize that these compacts will have the most impact if they are for the general licensee population. So military spouses have some special provisions in the compact, but any licensee is allowed to use the compact to practice in multiple states. Okay, just a little bit about our development process. There's a lot of words on this screen, but I would just direct your attention to the left side where we talk about phase 1, which is the development phase. That's where we're in now. Phase 2 deals with how it gets passed in the legislature, and phase 3 deals with transitioning to implementing the compact once it's passed by a number of states. But phase 1 is all about development. And so we started this process by convening what we call the Technical Assistance Group, which is a broader group of stakeholders. About 20 folks served on that group. There was a lot of licensees, hygienists and dentists, active licensees, board members, board administrators, folks from ADA, ADHA, some of the dental education groups. And so these folks met with CSG and created a framework for the compact, a set of recommendations about what should be in the compact that was then handed off to a separate group called the document team. The document team was a group, a much smaller group, about I think there were 7 folks on this group, and it was board attorneys, administrators, folks who had an expertise in drafting legislation. They took the recommendations from the TA group and they put pen to paper on the actual language itself. And so CSG met with this group regularly over the spring and summer and drafted the language that we're here to review today. And so where we're at in the process currently, you can see the highlighted portion there. We have a draft that is publicly available. We're hosting meetings like this to review the provisions of the compact, educate stakeholders within the profession, and then invite you to submit your comment and feedback to CSG. Because again, this is a draft and we want to make sure that the draft is meeting all the needs in the profession and that the compact is as good as it can be. And so if there are things that we talk about tonight where you're like, I just don't know about that, I have questions about that, that doesn't sit well with me, you know, we want to know all of that information so that we could potentially make updates to the compact as necessary. So we're inviting everyone to fill out a survey to give us your thoughts about the compact. Okay, so I just outlined this stakeholder review process. So we've got a draft that's publicly available. We're hosting meetings like this to review the provisions. We're inviting everybody to provide comment through the survey, comments and feedback. We're going to share all of that feedback with our document team. They're going to work through comment by comment every piece of feedback that we get, and we're going to make appropriate changes to the compact as necessary where there's consensus. And then after that, it'll be released to states for consideration and enactment. So once the compact is written, that's really when the language is set in stone. And so that's why it's really important, if there's things that you see now that you feel like need to change, it's important to communicate that now before the language is finalized, because then we can't go back and change it. Because if you remember, we're dealing with a contractual agreement. And so we can't have 50 different versions of a contract floating around out there. They all really need to be substantively the same. And so we can't be changing things on the back end to address particular issues. All that stuff's got to be done on the front end.
And Alyssa did just put that link in the chat for anyone interested. So check that out.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to get into the specifics of the compact. So this is what everyone came for tonight, and that's our next step in the meeting, is to review the provisions that are specific to the dentist and dental hygienist compact. Before we get into how the compact actually works, I wanted to touch on some commonly used terms that you'll see if you review the model legislation. And so the first term you see here is the term participating state. And so participating state is just any state that has enacted the compact. So if your state has joined the compact, you're considered a participating state. Number 2 is the term qualifying license. Qualifying license is an active and unencumbered license that's issued by a participating state. So if you hold a license in a state that is in the compact and that license is active and unencumbered, then you have a qualifying license. Number 3, remote state. So a remote state is any participating state where a licensee is not licensed and is seeking to practice. So it's a state where you do not hold a license and you want to practice. That's called a remote state. So let's say, for example, there's 35 states in the compact and you're licensed in the state of Colorado. You want to practice across the border in the state of Utah. Colorado would be the state where who is issued your qualifying license, and Utah would be considered the remote state where you're not licensed. Number 4, compact privilege. So a compact privilege is authorization that is granted by the compact to practice in that remote state. So that's what you're applying to receive through the compact, which grants you authorization to practice in that remote state. So in that example that I just gave, you're licensed in Colorado, you want to practice in Utah, you have a qualifying license from Colorado, and you have a compact privilege in Utah, which grants you authorization to practice in Utah. And so in any remote states where you want to practice, you apply for a compact privilege. So if you want to work in 8 different states, you apply for 7 different compact privileges in addition to the state where you hold your license. And then lastly, the Compact Commission, or just commission. This is the government agency that is established through the compact that administers the compact on an ongoing basis. So CSG's role in this process is to develop the compact, to help it get passed in the state legislature, and then we kind of take a back seat and we let the participating states take over. So ultimately, it's going to be the state's job to enforce this compact, and that's done by establishing this commission. So every state that's a participating state in the compact gets to elect one person to sit on the commission, and they have the vote for their state in terms of particular rules that are developed and decisions that are made for the compact. Every state gets one representative and one vote on the commission. Okay, so I touched briefly on an example of how this would work, and we'll highlight this a little bit more here on this slide. So you've got a dentist or a dental hygienist who is licensed in a participating state. So again, that is the licensee holds an active and unencumbered license in a compact state that's considered a qualifying license. And that dentist or hygienist applies for the compact privilege, which is what we just talked about on the previous slide. Practitioner will undergo an FBI background check. Their license and eligibility is verified. The practitioner pays fees for the privilege and then completes any jurisprudence requirements. And then after that, the compact privilege, the commission issues the compact privilege on behalf of that remote state. And that practitioner now has legal authorization to practice in remote states where they hold a compact privilege. So that's very broadly how it will work. You hold a qualifying license, you apply for the privilege, eligibility is verified, and the commission issues you the privilege. And people often say, well, how is this any different from just getting a license? And I think there's several things to point out here. One is speed, because the commission already houses licensing information from all the participating states. They don't need to go in and verify anything. They don't need to verify your exam scores. They don't need to verify your transcripts. All that information already lives with the commission. And so they can almost instantaneously review your application and determine your eligibility. So the PT Compact advertises that they can issue a compact privilege in 10 minutes. And so I think that's much a much better scenario than having to wait weeks or months for a licensing board to process your application and have all that primary source documentation go back and get your original transcripts or find your exam scores from the testing company. You don't have to do any of that anymore. And so the other thing to mention here is, the first thing is speed. And the other thing to mention is cost. So licenses can be expensive, sometimes several $100s to hold a license. And you're talking about renewing those regularly, paying for continuing education. And with the compact, it cuts all of that out. So there is a fee for the compact privilege, but it's pretty nominal. The PT Compact, their compact privilege fee is set at $45. So it's significantly less than a full licensing fee. And you only have to complete continuing education in the state that issued your qualifying license. So you're not having to complete all this additional CEs for licenses that you hold. You only have to complete CEs in one state. You only have to pay one state's renewal fee. And so it really cuts down on a lot of the cost as well. So That got into a lot of the detail that I'm going to share on later slides too, but just wanted to emphasize that because that's always a question that people have right off the bat is, well, if I'm still having to apply for something, how is that any different from a license? But we feel like it's a much faster, much streamlined, much more cost-efficient way of doing this. Okay, just to hammer home this point a little bit more, you hold one qualifying license, and that gives you the ability to apply for individual compact privileges in remote states. So it's a little bit different. I talked about the example of the driver's license, and it's a little bit different from the driver's license because you do have to apply for individual privileges in the remote states where you want to work. So you might hold one qualifying license from Colorado, let's say. You want to work in 4 of your neighboring states, you would have 4 compact privileges in addition to your qualifying license. Okay, so let's get into some of the requirements that are in the compact. So we've split this up into requirements on the state side. So this would be requirements that Colorado has to fulfill. But then there's also requirements from the licensee side. So we'll get into those on a later slide. This is requirements on the state side. So this is what the state has to have in place in terms of licensing requirements. So number one, the state has to require a background check for licensure. We talked about that on a previous slide. Number two, they have to utilize the national board examination as a requirement for licensure. So that's the written exam that is required by all states for licensure, the national board exam. Number three, require for licensure that applicants graduate from a pre-doctoral dental education program or a dental hygiene education program that's accredited by CODA. So that's a mouthful. Really, on the hygiene side, all you have to know is that your program has to be accredited by CODA. The drafting team was intentional about this phrasing for dentist here to say pre-doctoral dental education program because there's a lot of foreign trained dentists that don't graduate from CODA accredited programs. And so the drafting team wanted to clarify who exactly can use the compact. And so that's why they have this additional language here for dentists. But for the hygienist perspective, all you have to know is that your program needs to be accredited by CODA. And then lastly, require for licensure successful completion of a clinical assessment. And this is probably the most contentious point that we've had to work through so far, and is a point that we've consistently heard from states is could be a stumbling block for the compact, although I'm confident we'll be able to work through it. Just the varying requirements across states in terms of what is required for the clinical assessment. So this is not saying that you have to complete some sort of extra assessment to participate in the compact. This is talking about the clinical assessment that you completed prior to you being licensed. So the clinical exam that you took in order to get a license. And states are all over the place. Some states require a hands-on skills-based assessment. Other states require other types of exams that are more of a not so much you sit down in one setting and actually prove your skills, but is more of a not an apprenticeship pathway, but it's a longer term assessment. It's not just a one-time thing. So some states require live patient exams still. Other states are moving to mannequin-based exams. And so there's really kind of a spectrum here that we're trying to work through. So for purposes of the compact, there are no specifications about this clinical assessment. So we're not saying it has to be a live patient exam or it has to be a hands-on skills-based exam. All we say is that you have to complete a clinical assessment, and that hopefully will allow as many states as possible to join the compact. There might be some states that are uncomfortable with this, and it might take them a while to join the compact because they're hesitant because of this clinical assessment issue. But there's other states that we've talked with that this won't be an issue, and they'll be early adopters of the compact. So it really just depends kind of where your state is at in terms of clinical assessment for licensure. Okay, so the state has to have continuing professional development requirements as a condition for license renewal and pay a participation fee. So the state has a fee in order to be a member of the compact, and the state has to require CEs for license renewal. Okay, on the practitioner side, so this will look pretty familiar because we kind of just went through this on the state side, but it's also repeated in the practitioner side here as well. So number one, hold a qualifying license that's issued by a participating state. So again, qualifying license is defined as a active and unencumbered license that's issued by a participating state in the compact. Number two, have passed the national board exam, that written exam that's required for licensure. If you have a license, I think it's kind of a given that you've passed this exam because I think all states require it for licensure. Number three, again, graduation from a CODA accredited dental hygiene education program. And number four, successful completion of a clinical assessment. Again, in this section as well, it mirrors the section we just talked about with the state requirements. The compact is completely agnostic in terms of the type of clinical assessment that you completed. As long as you had some sort of skills assessment that proved your clinical competence, that's all that matters. And so that's all that the compact specifies. Doesn't say anything about the type or provider of a specific exam. Okay, meet any jurisprudence requirements established by the remote state where the licensee is seeking a compact privilege. So I'll just mention here, this is a requirement only if the state requires it. So only if this is a requirement from the state. Some states don't care about you passing a jurisprudence exam, but some states do have this in place. And so we're just saying if the remote state does require a jurisprudence assessment, that you would need to complete that. And these are very straightforward. Oftentimes they're open book, and it's just basically an attestation that you understand the laws and rules of the state where you are practicing in. And that's important because with the compact, you have to abide by the scope of practice wherever your services are being provided. So in the example I mentioned earlier, let's say you're licensed by Colorado and you're practicing in Utah, you're under the jurisdiction of Utah's licensing board, and you're under the jurisdiction of Utah's scope of practice. So if there's certain things that you're allowed to do in Colorado that maybe you're not allowed to do in Utah, you would need to know that, and you would need to abide by Utah's laws and rules while you're practicing there. So some states have put this jurisprudence requirements in place just to say, you understand our scope of practice and you understand our laws and rules in our state where you're seeking a compact privilege. And then lastly, pay applicable fees to the commission and to the remote state. Okay, just to briefly touch on some of the benefits that we see that this compact could potentially provide, and then we will move into the Q&A portion. So obviously the primary benefit we've been talking about is increased portability. So with the compact, you're able to practice in multiple states very easily. You're able to move very easily because it really doesn't matter where you live for purposes of the compact. It only matters where you're licensed. So if you, let's say you live in Utah, you're licensed in Utah, and you move to Arkansas, as long as you maintain that Utah license, you can still participate in the compact. You can still get compact privileges. You can still practice in Utah and any of the other states that are in the compact as long as you maintain that license. And so residency really is not an issue anymore. You can hold a license wherever you want, and you can practice wherever you want via the compact. The compact allows you to expand your employment opportunities into new markets. So you're not limited anymore to just where you're licensed. You can expand into new states. We've talked about the issue regarding military families. That's why DoD cares about this. From the regulatory side, boards really like this because of the reduced administrative burden. They spend less time processing out-of-state applications because they're not receiving as many out-of-state applicants for licensure. The compact allows them to retain jurisdiction over the practitioners that are in their state, and also it enhances cooperation amongst state boards, which enhances public health and safety. And so with the development of the compact, there is also developed a sophisticated data system that houses information about licensees, that allows boards to communicate with one another about people practicing in multiple states. So the Colorado board will be interfacing with all the other member states in the compact via this data system about practitioners working in Colorado, and then Colorado practitioners working in other states. And so it's really providing the regulators a forum that previously didn't exist and giving them more information than they currently have access to. And then lastly, just broadly promoting workforce development in the state while simultaneously preserving state sovereignty and expanding access to care. Compacts are a great tool for expanding services into places where there's shortages. Maybe there's rural areas of the state that have a real shortage of providers, and through the compact, you're able to recruit providers to come and work and fill those shortage areas on a temporary or permanent basis. And so it's really a great workforce tool to be able to fill shortage areas in your state. Okay, so next steps. I would encourage everybody, if this sparked any interest in you in learning more about this, we just really briefly touched on some of the important provisions that are in the compact. Every Wednesday, we'll be hosting one tomorrow, actually. We have what we call a weekly compact review session, where we put the compact up on a screen and we walk through it section by section, talk through all the provisions, and really go into more detail than I was able to cover in this meeting tonight. So this is more of a high-level overview. If you want to get down into the weeds, I'd encourage you to attend one of those Wednesday sessions. Those are at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So I know that's hard to manage for some people that have a full load of patients that they're seeing. But if you did have time and in the interest, we'd welcome you to attend those virtual meetings. We're going to be looking at presenting to other stakeholder groups within the profession. So we've presented to a lot of different ADA, ADHA state chapters, presenting to state boards, the Association of Dental Boards and Dental Administrators. And so we're just trying to get the word out about the compact, do as much education as possible, and really spread the word about this in order to get as much feedback as we can. And so that's the goal, is to get feedback on the draft. And then again, like I shared earlier, we're going to collect all that feedback, all that public comment. We're going to share it with our document team and the technical assistance group, and they're going to help us make updates and changes to the compact as necessary. And then lastly, our hope is that it's released out to states in 2023. So we're hoping that we can wrap this up by the end of the year and that it will be available for states to pass in the next legislative session. So that's our goal. That's kind of the roadmap for how this will look over the next couple of months, and a little bit about how you can get involved. So I really appreciate everyone's attention tonight. Hopefully you found that information helpful and interesting, and I'm happy to stay on as long as necessary and answer any questions. So I will hand it back over to Val.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. I'm going to point out before I read through some questions that Alyssa did put in the chat, the survey link, the link to sign up for a Wednesday session, and also the draft language. So check that out. Our first question is, do you work with the individual state boards of dentistry, dental hygiene committees, or dental hygiene states that are self-governing? I think that's probably a nod to California.
Yeah, so we work with any states that are interested in joining the compact. And so I know there are a couple states that have independent dental hygiene boards. So in those instances, we would be working with both the dental board and the hygienist board.
Okay, great. The next question is, if you happen to already have a dental hygiene license in 2 or more states, and these states join the compact, would you be able to let one of these licenses lapse and still be able to work in those states? Like, how does that go when there's existing dual licenses already?
Yeah, so that's kind of the main benefit of the compact is that you no longer have to maintain multiple licenses. So I think a key distinction there is that both states have to be a part of the compact. So in that scenario, you could let one of your licenses lapse. It really doesn't matter which one. And you could get a compact privilege in that state where your license is lapsed. And then all you would have to do is maintain that one license. Your privilege would automatically renew as your one license renews, and that's all you would have to do. So you would still have access to both of those states. You just would need one license instead of two.
And only if they both join the compact
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
until, okay, got it.
Yeah. If there's a state that you're working in that you hold a license in that's not a member of the compact, I wouldn't go letting
Yeah.
that license lapse quite yet.
Yep. Okay. Next question, will the CSG proponents obtain the necessary state legislators as sponsors of legislation? I think you already said we do anticipate this next session, or just working with partners. This is one of our Colorado lobbyists, so.
Yeah, so CSG does have a role in working with the legislature. We do partner often with groups like ADA, ADHA, and individual state chapters because obviously the states know the particular politics in their state. And so oftentimes state chapters are very helpful in terms of identifying bill sponsors and things like that. And so from CSG side, our work with the legislature is more educational. We can't directly lobby for the legislation because we're nonpartisan, but we can provide educational resources. We can answer questions. We work with bill drafters to resolve any drafting issues. And so that's primarily our role. And then we provide educational testimony and things like that. But in terms of formal lobbying, we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, so say CODA invited you to talk to some legislatures at the state level to answer questions, bill sponsors, that would be reasonable to ask in the future. Okay.
Yes, certainly happy to do that. Yes.
Great. Okay, next question. Do all participating states have to have the same definition of successful completion of clinical assessment? I think that was no. It's still pertaining to each state, correct?
Yeah, every state retains control over whatever they require for licensure in terms of clinical exams. But by joining the compact, you're essentially saying, I feel comfortable taking people from other states who have not met my state specific requirements. So if your state requires exam X and I'm coming from a state that requires exam Y, the first state has to be comfortable accepting that person who didn't take exam X. And so it's just, I think it's an acknowledgement that, all clinical assessments are a proof of clinical competence. And, I think there might be a perception out there that some are like easier to pass than others. And so by states joining onto a compact, you're essentially creating a reciprocity around exams. Whatever you require, whatever I require, it's all similar, and it's all a proof of clinical competence. And so I can accept your practitioners, you can accept mine.
Gotcha. Okay, next question. Not all states have the same delegable functions for being dental hygienists. How will that be resolved? Will each state require additional requirements before you're eligible to be licensed? I think what they're getting at is, for instance, like while Colorado has been able to do local anesthesia for many years, right now there's a separate permit. And so folks coming, they would still have to abide by our state laws.
Yes, that's exactly right. So like I mentioned around the scope of practice issue, wherever you're practicing, you have to abide by that state's laws and rules. So in Colorado's example, if there's somebody coming from a state and Colorado requires an additional permit to administer local anesthesia, they could get a compact privilege in order to work in Colorado. But if they wanted to administer local anesthesia, they need to go and obtain that additional permit. So anything like that across
Yeah.
states, you're still allowed to have extra requirements to do additional activities that might not be in just the core function of a dental hygienist. So things like local anesthesia that require a little bit extra.
Right. And it's actually just a course, not a permit, but yeah, all that language gets garbled
Yeah.
sometimes. Okay, an anonymous person, is the fee per every state you apply for in the compacts? So there's a fee for each separate reciprocal license,
Yes. So for each compact privilege that you want to obtain, it would be a separate fee for each.
but sounds like much smaller than getting a license in each of those.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Next question, is the remote state compact privilege renewed on a cycle like the state licensure? For example, every 2 years here in Colorado?
Yeah, so it will renew it will renew in sync with your license. So if your license is valid for 2 years, then your privileges would renew every 2 years as well. So it just renews completely in sync with how your license is renewed. So as long as your license is maintained and is in good standing, your privileges are automatically going to renew.
Okay. All right, next question regarding residency. In the example of a Utah license practicing in Arkansas, which state enforces in the event of a violation of the Practice Act? In parentheses has assumed the state where they commit the violation. So say they're practicing in a different state, but they hold their qualifying license not in that state.
Mhm.
So if there's a lawsuit, can the non-resident state have jurisdiction over the licensee after they have left the state by
Mhm.
virtue of their previous practice in that state?
Yes, great question. So every state retains jurisdiction over practice that occurs within their borders. And so that includes the ability to discipline practitioners. So in the scenario I painted between Utah and Arkansas, let's say they're licensed in Utah, they're practicing via the compact in Arkansas, and they violate Arkansas's Practice Act. Arkansas would be able to take appropriate action just as if that person held a license in Arkansas. So they could fine, suspend, encumber, completely revoke the privilege for them to work in Arkansas. What Arkansas can't do is take any action on their Utah license because they have no jurisdiction over the Utah license, only Utah does. So Arkansas can say, we don't want you working in Arkansas anymore, or we're going to suspend you for a month or whatever the appropriate action that's deemed, but they can't do anything to the Utah license. Now, in that scenario, Utah is able to, because of the information sharing between the compact member states, if the act is egregious enough that was committed in Arkansas, Utah could say, we're going to also take appropriate action on your Utah license because the act was so severe. So in that particular scenario, you could be under discipline in both states. But the remote state can only take action on the privilege that gets you into that remote state, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I think that helps a lot. Okay, next question. So there will be one compact that the states can join, correct? I think that's correct, per profession. Or there could be potentially several compacts that states could choose. I think there's just one version, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So there's one dentistry and dental hygiene compact that has both professions included, and states can join on to that one compact. So that is sometimes a misconception that people have, that we're creating like regional agreements, like this compact over here is only for the northwestern states and this one's for the southeastern states. But these compacts are intended to be national in their scope and size, and so it's our hope that eventually all 50 states would be members of this.
Gotcha. Okay, will the commission have an accessible data bank of licensees whose licenses are revoked or suspended. So any member of the compact, I think this person is asking.
Yes, and that is a component of that data system that I mentioned. So the commission will have a data system. Anybody that has ever had any sort of action on their license or any discipline history, all that information would live in the data system. And so if somebody was applying for a privilege, let's say in Colorado coming from another state, the commission would be able to say, oh, they have, these previous issues on their license, and let Colorado make their determination on whether or not Colorado wants to grant them the privilege.
Right.
Based on their discipline history.
Yeah. This next question is good. It says dental hygienists graduating in 2020 in Utah did not need to complete a clinical exam to obtain licensure. Will they be able to participate? I think this is important because while I know that was the case for a short term, once license renewal turned over, Colorado 2020 graduates needed to complete a clinical exam, but it was kind of delayed to allow for everything with COVID. So great question.
Yeah, that is a good question. That's not a scenario that we've really discussed before. I will say it is a requirement in the compact that everybody have successfully completed a clinical assessment. So if you haven't done that, then you wouldn't be eligible to participate in the compact, but it sounds like most graduates have. It was just a little bit delayed.
That was the case in Colorado. It sounds like maybe in Utah that wasn't required.
Okay.
Based on how the question was written. So, yeah.
That's a good question. Yeah, that's an interesting scenario though, and something I think would probably be helpful for our drafting team to consider. So I'd encourage that person to fill out the survey and let us know about that so we can work through that issue.
Yeah, or the Utah Reagan practice chair as well, for sure. Thank you. Okay, next question. The practitioner decides which state is their qualifying state, question mark? I think it's just the initial license they have, right?
Yeah. So if you're holding multiple licenses, then there's a choice there. Which license do you want to continue with as your qualifying license? But if you currently only hold one license, then that's just going to be your qualifying license.
Gotcha.
If you've never been licensed before, then I guess you do have a choice about where you could get your qualifying license. But I think most people using the compact are going to already hold a license somewhere.
Yeah. Great. The next question, how will it work to look up a license on an employee? Will you still have a license number per that state, even if it's one that you've gotten privileges for?
Yeah, so there's a component of the data system. There will be a kind of interface for the member states that houses all that discipline information that's not public information. But then there's also going to be a public facing component where people can look up, okay, this person, here's where their qualifying license is issued from, here's where they hold privileges. And yes, each compact privilege does come with like a unique identifying number.
Okay, so then employers in that way will be able to look up that information.
Yes.
Or potential employers also.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next question, back to local anesthesia. Assuming you can't administer it in a state that does not allow hygienists to do so, even though you have an active permit in a state that does. Correct. So whatever state you're working in, if they don't allow that, even if you can back in your initial state, you can't do it there. Did I answer that?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Yeah.
So again, just gets back to the principle of you got to abide by the scope of practice wherever you're practicing.
Yep. Okay. Another question. So you said that the compact would be active for the duration of your license. Do you apply for the compact under one specific license and it follows that one? Say I have two licenses and one renews this year, the other renews next year. How does that work? So it sounds like they have two licenses already.
Yeah. So then for purposes of the compact, you would just pick which one you want to continue and use as your qualifying license. And then you wouldn't really need to maintain those two licenses if both of those states were a member of the compact.
Okay. All right, last one here. How would you choose what license to enter the compact with? Are there perks to ND? Oh, okay, Christy, so each state legislature decides to enter the compact or not. So it's not individuals. And this is going to be enacted next legislative session, which starts after first of the year for, I think, pretty much all states.
I think what she's asking is like, if you had 3 licenses, how would you pick which one to keep as your qualifying license?
Oh, I
And
see.
probably you would do that based off of fees, I would think.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that would just be a personal decision.
Yeah.
Which board you feel like is the easiest to interface with, which one has the lowest fees, lowest number of continuing education hours, things like that.
Got it. Okay, I definitely misread what that meant. Okay, thanks, Alyssa. Great. Oh, one more. Okay, is there ever a chance a state would drop the compact once entered? It's a good question.
Yeah, so it has happened. It's very rare. So you guys saw the slide, over 230 pieces of compact legislation. Only one time has it ever been repealed, and that was the EMS compact in Vermont. And there was some extenuating circumstances there. The firefighters union came out against the compact and the state decided to repeal it. But that's the only time that's ever happened. There are provisions in the compact for the state to repeal it if they wanted to. So there's always an out, and it's the same process for how you join the compact. It's a bill passed through the legislature in order to remove yourself from the agreement. So it's possible, but very rare.
Gotcha. Well, Matt, I want to thank you for your time. Don't be surprised if we reach out to you at the upcoming legislative session. If anybody on here is interested in getting more involved, we love people for our regulation and practice committee. There's one more question that got thrown up there. I'm going to have you answer this since we're not up to our 1 hour yet. Trying to understand this, will New Mexico be able to join this compact through their legislature next year? Yes, Jordan, I believe so, as long as you work with the dental hygiene, New Mexico lobbyists, right? Whoever at the New Mexico Dental Hygiene Association is involved in the regulation and practice committee should know who the go-to lobbyists are for legislation. And yes, you would be able to join in on this, assuming bill sponsors are gotten, appropriate education, which Matt is helping with, which is great. Hopefully that answers your question, but yes, all states have the option to join. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate your time with the evening and everything, and certainly reach out to myself, president@codha.org, or Alyssa at codha.org. Those links are in the chat, but we can certainly send them as well if you missed it. So great. All right, have a good night, everybody. And then we are recording this, so if a colleague was not able to join, we can forward that as well for you to share with them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Yep, have a good night.